It's a sandblasted glass, and then it's been cut out to give the pattern there, and the HT. People don't have an idea about how tall prairie grass was, so whenever we find it, our family cuts it and brings it in. And this is I think this is the big blue stem, but it is definitely the turkey foot. If you take a look, you'll see that the seed pod on the top is 3 strands out, and that's why it's called the turkey foot. The house was built in 1878, and Henry Tubbs died here in 1899. His wife, Emily Underhill, lived on until 1923. At that point, after she died, the house was inherited by Myra Tubbs Ricketts. And she realized then that this was going to be her home, and so she basically did it all over. And most of the house, as we see it now, dates back to the 20s when Myra Ricketts did all of the decorating. And some of the things to look at that are really quite special, in the ceilings are the plaster medallions. And in each room, the plaster medallions are different. Myra was so smart that she had the plaster work in the ceiling all painted an ecru color. And so she took the medallions and had them all painted in an ecru color, and then the shadows in a darker ecru. And as a result, they have never looked dirty, and they have never been repainted, which means that they're beautifully precise. Many, many old houses have medallions in the ceilings, but they've always been painted white and repainted and repainted and repainted, and you can hardly see the patterns. But these are extraordinary, and as we go from room to room, you want to check every medallion in the middle. The other thing that she did, because we are only a block and a half away from the CB&Q railroad that goes through, and we go through a minor earthquake every time one of the big trains goes through, she had all of the ceilings here and the walls were fabricated. She didn't like the honey-colored Victorian color of the wood, so she had all of it changed to this walnut color. In fact, she had an Italian come and live down here for a period of time while he really did all of the woodwork. And he did a lot of faux bois work. That's where he makes the wood look like the pattern of a specific wood. And all the doors here have really extraordinary faux bois work on it. We'll look at those as we come to them. And it's quite extraordinary. You see that in a lot of other Victorian houses, but not as fine as this and not left as well. So all of this is now, the faux bois work is 100 years old because it was done in 1923. Then on top of the woodwork, the lace curtains had been traditional on these windows, and they had Italian lace that when it was really quite amazing. The family would start, there are 5 windows in the living room, 3 windows in the front parlor. So she'd buy a set of 5 curtains for the living room. When the sun destroyed one on the south, she'd put that set aside and then later hang them here in the parlor. And kept rotating these around. It's been one of the fun things to keep house, where your mother and grandmother and great-grandmother did, because you see how they did things. And they rotated these curtains around. And these presently, when we finally wore out the very last set, these were replacement that are French. They're French Dacron, and they're quite handsome. But they have only 2 patterns. We have the same pattern in the living room and in the front parlor, as we have and then another pattern in the dining room and in the study. So the lace curtains are all very typical. And then, because Myra had such great taste, she had all of the draperies made, these brown and blue draperies. They're just gorgeous, and they are all Italian Fartuni silk. And they have not been cleaned. Everybody's afraid to do anything to them, but they would just disintegrate at this point. But all of these things are, you'll see, they're throughout the house. So we'll come back to them again. But at any rate, so that's the furnishings. And then she was very fond of Oriental rugs, and so she kept buying more and more Oriental rugs. As you can see, these are fine ones here. But well, the other thing that is interesting is that throughout the house she used a lot of Victorian lighting, which tends to be kind of indirect. For instance, on top of the piano, there's a Victorian light that throws the light up to the ceiling. And in these other rooms we have bookcase lamps. It's all, we'll point them out as we go along. Then, as far as specific things in this room, as far as furniture, the most important piece in this living room, as a matter of fact in the entire house, is this little rocker. Because this little rocker had been handmade by one of the Tubbses, and in upstate New York when they were still there. And the Tubbses, they lived near Cooperstown, New York, in a little town called Buell, near Fly Creek. And they, in the 1840s, they built a house there that was going to be a tavern and give them a home and an occupation. And on December 10th there, in 1843, they had a home warming for this. And by gum, they overheated the chimney and burned the house down. And this little chair was thrown out of a second-story window. And so far as we know, it's the only thing that survived and from that period. So it's very special. And we're not sure which one of the Tubbses made it. It may well have been Lemuel. But it's a lovely little rocker. So that's prize number 1. And that's a little horsehair, a love seat and chair. And it's perfectly marvelous. If you rub your hand across it, it is made out of horsehair, horse tails and mane. And it means it's terribly strong, terribly durable, and has this nice shiny quality. It's just a little uncomfortable to sit on because all the little horsehair bits stick up. This is a picture of Howard Taylor Ricketts, who was Myra's husband. And he was the scientist, the medical scientist, who discovered the rickettsial microorganism. He was working in Montana and discovered the rickettsial microorganism there, and then was quite sure that it also caused typhus, went to Mexico, and contracted the disease and died there. So he's a martyr to the cause, but a very famous one, because it's the only one in the natural order that is named after a man. For instance, you have bacteria and you have viruses who are at the same level as the rickettsial microorganism. There was no Dr. Via and no Dr. Back. So that's a very special portrait. And then right underneath it, when he died in Mexico City, Myra went down by train and was there before he died. And he said to her, when she went and see him, he said, "Oh, Myra, I'm so glad you're here. Now you can take charge." Well, she didn't speak Spanish, didn't know a thing about Mexico City. It was a little difficult. And the next morning when she went to see him, he said, "Oh, Myra, I've been longing to tell you." And she said, now, however, you need to rest." She walked 20 paces away and turned around, and everyone had gathered around and he had died. And she spent all of her life, they were in their 30s then, they were the same age, but she lived until she was 83, and all the time she wondered what it was he wanted to tell her, of course. So there are many, many stories about him, but none of us have, of course, knew him because he died in 1910. Here are the living room medallions there. You see they're quite different. The center one's quite different. On the ceiling over in the bay window, we have a plant hook, which was a big Victorian thing. They would hang large plants there. And there's another one in the dining room that we will see that traditionally had an enormous Christmas cactus hanging in it. We don't know what really hung usually from this one. All the lighting fixtures in the house were gas lit, as was special in that period. And one of the things why people came to see the opening of the house in December was the gas lights. And since, of course, then the gas has been disconnected and they have not even been electrified, they are just as they always were, but they don't light anymore. What's rather fascinating is that the glass globes, there are 4 glass globes there. And of course they're quite fragile and breakable. And when one breaks, just like the curtains, then the 3 remaining ones would be boxed and put in the attic and waited to go on another lamp that only has 3 shades. For instance, in the parlor where we first just were, there is a chandelier that has 3 glass globes. And so that's the next one in line. And then in the study, there's a chandelier with 2 glass globes. It's all rather fun. Here we can look, and once again there are Fortuny curtains there, or draperies there, and the French glass curtains. And I think they're just gorgeous, and particularly when you get the light shining through them as they are now. They're beautiful. And behind those, of course, there are shutters. The house has internal shutters throughout on these big Victorian windows. And by custom, all the ones on the top are kept closed and all the ones on the bottom are kept open. And of course you can regulate the little louvers so you have more or less light. And there are also shades behind that to keep the sunlight off of the back of the shutters. So this is a nice example, but you'll see them in all the windows throughout. Here are those shutters in the front parlor. You can see the top set are closed and the bottom set are open. This is the living room. The other one we were looking at was the parlor, the front parlor. And of course that's where people were laid out when they died, were in the front parlor. And the living room was a more used room. And in the living room here we have a Tiffany lamp. Myra loved lovely things. So when Tiffany came out with her lamps, she indeed got one, not only one, but 2 Tiffany lamps. This is a simpler one. A lot of the Tiffany lamps have brightly colored fruits or flowers on them, but this was her choice, but it still is a signed Tiffany lamp that's always signed on the bottom. The chair next to it is a Morris chair, which is very well known. You can adjust the back of that to change the ankle on it. There's a rod across the back, and that's also a very much of a period piece. This room is full of pictures of Myra's grandchildren, and the one on the bottom is Nancy Ricketts, and the one above it is Howard Ricketts, and then moving around the room to the right, and that's my mother, Elizabeth Ricketts Palmer, and her son Robert. Yeah, and that's the youngest of her grandchildren, brother Henry. And then if we move to this wall over here, that's me on the bottom, that's Betsy. The next one up is cousin Shirley Ricketts. And the next one up is my brother Donald Palmer. So she made sure that she had all of her grandchildren here in this room. I said, and that's a little daguerreotype of Henry Tubbs when he was a young man. That's Lemuel and Lydia Tubbs. There are very few pictures from that period, of course, and so special. And now we're going to move into the study. That's nice faux bois work on that door, on the central panel, and then on the frame, and then at the very top, the key on the very top is also nice. It looks like nice faux bois work. They're quite beautiful. Well, this is the study, or at least we call it the study now. It's also the room where most people, there used to be a horsehair chaise longue here, and most people who were sick stayed here. And in fact, this is where Henry Tubbs died, and where I believe Rolla Tubbs died as well. Here's the medallion in the study. As you can see, it's different. And the gas light here has only 2 shades. So we're down now from 4 to 2. Here's a desk, and there's a lot of, that's reference works that are kept there. There's another bookcase here that has children's stories in it. The very top of this bookcase has little pocketbooks that they carried. They were driving mules on the Erie Canal quite a little bit because they lived in upstate New York there. And those are the books they carried. The picture on the left is Henry Tubbs as a young man when he was president of all the banks and very active here. The picture on the right is his daughter Myra Tubbs Ricketts when she was president of all the banks. And we're doing that. Now then, to the right of that is her son Henry on the right, and then on the far left is Myra's son-in-law, Walter L. Palmer. This is a picture of Emily Underhill. And here is the medallion in the dining room, which is lovely, and a different kind of a lamp here. But there's also a plant hanger. That's the plant hanger in the bay window that had the Christmas cactus in it. This is a very nice late 19th century American painting of St. Albans, Vermont, with Mount Mansfield in the background. We don't know who the artist is, but it's a very nice painting. It's one of the things we'd like to discover. This clock was made by Glenn Smith, who lived out there on the old home farm that we saw earlier, and there's a picture of it in the bottom of the clock. He did a lot of nice woodworking, and the clock was his. This is a picture of Mandy, Aunt Mandy Mandolin Frank Ricketts, who's married to Henry Ricketts. And then the portrait on the left, these are just various Victorian bits and pieces. And when you come to the windows and the curtains, another French, these with birds, little birds on them, more blinds, and a sink. And then on the wall on the right, if you get over there, is a copy of, here's a picture of my mother, Elizabeth Ricketts Palmewr, who was, so. And so that's the study here, and all of the things that went on in here. There's a very good fireplace in this room and a good fireplace in the living room that are used quite a bit. And now we're going to move on into the dining room. And here is the medallion in the